The New York Rangers do not figure to have a ton of salary cap space once free agency begins, but which players could they look to target with the limited amount of money that they do have today? Going to be looking at a former New York Ranger, a sniper returning from an injury who could possibly be had at a discounted price, and finally an aging but inexpensive agitator and a former Stanley Cup champion. We debate all these free agents and more on today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers.
You're Locked On the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 848 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today, as I mentioned in the intro, going to look at three free agent candidates for the New York Rangers. Some of them may be a little bit more realistic than others, but I think all of them have at least some merit. Going to have some fun discussing a couple of different UFAs from around the league. And we're going to start, as I mentioned, with a former New York Ranger, a player with whom a reunion could make at least some sense. And that's going to be 31-year-old right winger Jesper Fast. Fast, if you guys remember, taken by the Rangers in the 6th round all the way back in 2010 at number 157 overall. Basically the only good pick that the Rangers made in an otherwise just awful draft class by the New York Rangers. I'm sorry, there's really no other way to say it. Let me preface this by saying that it's going to be tough, but certainly not impossible to pull this off financially. I know a lot of Ranger fans feel like this team could use some more guys like Jesper Fast, and that maybe they could squeeze him in underneath the salary cap. If it wasn't for the salary cap issues, like if there was no salary cap or the Rangers had a ton of space, I would be all for this. Rangers, as we've documented on here, very thin at right wing, and Fast does give the Rangers some more of what they need, a defensively responsible forward, someone willing to do the dirty work, someone who just goes out there and plays his tail off every single shift. But again, I'm just not so sure the money is going to be there. Even though he doesn't make a ton of money and probably won't break the bank this time around either, not so sure that financially it's going to work between him and the Rangers. Something else about Jesper Fast was always a beloved teammate when he was on the New York Rangers. Won the Players Player Award 5 straight seasons from 2015-2016 to 2019-2020. That gives you an idea of just how beloved he was in that locker room. Great defender, great penalty killer as well. As far as the kind of contract that he could be looking for, first of all, let's go back in time to when he became a UFA the first time around with the Rangers. And there were rumors at the time that Fast, essentially priced himself out of New York. He was looking for like $4 million a year, and the Rangers simply were not going to go that high. And then he ends up signing with the Carolina Hurricanes, and he just now concluded a 3-year, $6 million contract with the Canes. So that deal obviously carried a cap hit of $2 million per season. I realize he's a little bit older now at 31, and it's not like he's a superstar. So if you're a big Jesper Fast fan, then you might try to talk yourself into the Rangers possibly getting him for about the same contract, about the same price tag. And it certainly is something that's possible. I would probably lean against it. I'd put it less than 50-50. I mean, to begin with, any UFA coming to the Rangers or any one specific team has less than a 50-50 chance of happening. So that's first and foremost. But again, I'm just not so sure the Rangers will be able to afford him. And I think his price, given the playoff run that he just had with the Carolina Hurricanes, has probably gone up at least a little bit. And we'll get to that in greater detail in just a second. But to look at Jesper Fast's career stats, 630 games over the course of 10 seasons, 7 with the Rangers, and these last 3 with the Canes, 85 goals, 144 assists, so 229 points in 630 games. He's also a plus 41 in that time. He's averaged 14 minutes and 42 seconds of ice time per night, 995 hits, 377 block shots. And to focus in on what he did this past season, what could be his last with the Canes, certainly the last of the contract that he's on, 80 games. That was the second most of his career, scored 10 goals, tied for the 4th most of his career, had 19 assists. He 3 times in his career has had exactly 20 assists, so just 1 fewer than his career high. Was also a +9. That was the 3rd best mark of his career. Also 1444 of ice time, 104 hits, and 40 block shots. And I know that, a lot of Ranger fans are kind of pitching this idea that, if Barclay Goodrow gets traded, which it feels like he probably will, because I just don't know if the Rangers can continue to afford him. But if they trade Barclay Goodrow, Jesper Fast could end up being basically a less expensive version of Barclay Goodrow. But I do caution that if the Rangers were to trade Barclay Goodrow, a lot of the money that they're saving there, the $3.61 million cap hit, would probably go to the Rangers' own guys, extending RFAs like Keandre Miller, like Alexis Lafreniere. They're the two big ones. So I'm not so sure that the Rangers would, trade Barclay Goodrow and then bring in Jesper Fast at, not a whole lot less per season than Barclay Goodrow would have been making. Again, it is certainly possible. The other thing you could do here, if you're the Rangers and you're looking to bring back Jesper Fast and do so at a reasonable price, and I caution that this is a little bit of a slippery slope if you keep doing this with one player after the next. But the one thing that you could do, again, very similar to what they did with Vincent Trocheck this past offseason, you give him a few more years than maybe you would like to go, and you do so at a lesser average annual value. Maybe like they could get Jesper Fast for like 5 years at like 1.5 million, 1.75 million, somewhere in that ballpark. That's a way to guarantee Jesper Fast more money in the long run. It's also a way for the Rangers to keep the average annual value down a little bit and, circumnavigate the cap, basically, by not having to pay him as much as you would have to pay him if you gave him a short-term deal. The reason that I don't think they would do this is I just don't think that they're going to make that kind of a long-term commitment to Jesper Fast. And I realize at 1.5 million or 1.75 million, it's not an enormous amount of money, but it does eat into the salary cap a little bit. And I just feel like the Rangers are going to prioritize some of their younger players. Guys are eventually going to need, contract extensions that we're not even thinking about this offseason. And I just don't think they're going to want, Jesper Fast to essentially get in the way of that. 1.5, 1.75, 2 million, whatever it might be. It still is eating into the cap at least a little bit. And I just don't see the Rangers doing that. I do think Jesper Fast, here's another thing that's working against the Rangers. We know that, or there were certainly a lot of rumors at the time that he was asking for a good amount of money from the Rangers. He might be at a point in his career where he's just going to go with the highest bidder. And I never begrudge a player for doing that because this is a business. If we've heard that once, we've heard it a million times. And Jesper Fast to date in his career has yet to really cash in. He's never made more than $2 million per season. And he's coming off of, like I said, a really, really strong playoff run with the Canes, 15 playoff games, 6 goals, 3 assists. He was a +2, averaged 1646 of ice time in this playoff run for the Canes. So he was obviously rewarded for his strong play. And all of his goals were really clutch. A couple of overtime goals. He had an overtime goal that eliminated the Devils. He had a goal in Game 4 against the Panthers that momentarily kept the Canes alive. It was very late in the third period, and it tied the game. Of course, the Panthers went on to win. But Jesper Fast, a really strong playoff run. And we could debate how much that's going to improve his price this offseason, how much that's going to increase it. But I got to believe it's increased it at least a little bit. And again, a reunion between Fast and the Rangers, it makes some sense. It is certainly possible. Hopefully there's no hard feelings between him, as far as him walking is concerned the last time around. But overall, do I think it's going to happen? Probably not, but it is something that's on the table. And if they can make it work financially, I'd be all for it because I love Jesper Fast when he was here. And again, he does bring a lot of the things that the Rangers need, a strong defensive forward, somebody who's going to go to work on the forecheck. One of those guys, just kind of a glue guy, somebody that goes out there, plays every shift like it's his last, and somebody that, could be in even a little bit of a leadership role for the Rangers when he comes back. Because at 31, he's going to be like the 3rd or 4th oldest player on the team, if you can actually believe that. And of course, that depends on who else they bring in this offseason. But Jesper Fast would be one of the veterans and one of the players with the most experience as a New York Ranger on the entire roster if he is brought back. We'll keep everything rolling in just a second. I want to shift our attention to somebody who I don't think the Rangers are probably going to be able to afford him, but he is coming off of an injury. And so, a 1-year prove-it deal could be on the table. And it's at least possible that maybe the Rangers could take a look at this player. And we're going to get to that in just a second. But first, we do have to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it is all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only, and exclusions do apply. All right, we just want to go ahead and thank everybody, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. And for the everydayers, obviously, we're going to continue New York Ranger Head Coach Watch 2023 here. I saw a report, I believe it was from Elliot Friedman earlier. There was a tweet that went out that he believes that the Rangers and Peter Laviolette have some momentum, could be closing in on a deal for him to become the next head coach of this team. So obviously keep our eye on that and see if anything transpires there. But for right now, let's go ahead, keep our eyes on a couple of other UFA options for the New York Rangers. You've got Max Pacioretty. I wanted to throw him out there. 34-year-old right winger, was an all-star as recently as 2020. And at first glance, you're going to hear this and think, come on, there's no way they're going to be able to afford him. This is somebody that recently was making $7 million per year over the course of 4 years. And yeah, you're probably right. It's very, I don't want to say very unlikely. It's unlikely that the Rangers would be able to afford to bring in a player like Max Pacioretty. The one reason why I think the door cracks open just a little bit here is because he is coming off of 2 injury-riddled seasons. And I feel like, the possibility of him being on a 1-year prove-it deal, maybe not getting as much money as he would have gotten a couple of years ago, the fact that he's 34 years old, I think works against him a little bit as well. So I feel like that 1-year prove-it deal really could be on the table for Max Pacioretty. And for whichever team that signs him, the guy's a bona fide sniper. I think he could, really return a lot on that investment for whatever team, wants to roll the dice, especially if it's just a 1-year deal and a reasonable commitment as far as the dollars are concerned. And, if it's the Rangers, I'd be happy about that because I think he checks a lot of boxes. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. Again, the reason why this is even slightly on the table, just a little bit, is because of the injury risk. You look at the past 3 seasons of Pacioretty's career, it's been tough for him to stay on the ice. This year with the Canes, he had just 5 games, but he did score 3 goals in those 5 games before he tore his Achilles for the second time. Year before that in Vegas, he played just 39 games, but in those 39 games, he did have 37 points, so was flirting with point-per-game territory there. The year before that, also in Vegas, he played in just 48 games, did have 51 points in those 48 games. And I should also mention that season that I'm referring to, that was one of the COVID years, and every team only played 56 games, so Pacioretty played in 48 of the 56. Not bad. And for what it's worth, the second surgery on his Achilles that he had occurred in January, and it was done to reinforce the tendon. And I'm not a doctor, making some adjustments in there where he's going to continue to hopefully play hockey for as long as he wants to keep playing hockey currently at the age of 34. And again, there is injury risk here, but I think if he can be had on a reasonable price at a 1-year prove-it deal, he does check some boxes for the New York Rangers. Again, what we've been talking about, the need for a right winger. Rangers are very, very thin at that position. Came with when he was drafted by the Rangers. And, Pacioretty, again, there is risk, but he could step right back into being a bona fide top 6 right winger in this league. And I'm not so sure the Rangers will be able to afford him, even with the discounted price or the possible discounted price and the possible short-term deal that he would probably be getting. The other thing I want to mention here, too, the injury history might scare some people away. I'm not too worried about it because the Rangers, knock on wood here, they've been one of the healthier teams in the league the last couple of seasons. You look at this past season, Philip Hedl missed a handful of games and Ryan Lindgren was out for a little bit. Other than that, the Rangers were pretty much healthy, the entire team, for the entire season. So to me, I'm not too worried about having just one injury-prone player on the roster. It's when you have like 5 or 6 or 7 injury-prone players on the team that it starts to become at least a little bit of an issue. So just having one doesn't really bother me at all. But getting back to the box checking here, Pacioretty, we mentioned that he's a right winger. That's first and foremost, but he can snipe. He is a shoot-first player, booming slap shot. Rangers could really use somebody like that. He has more goals rather than assists for his career, 326 goals against 319 assists. So, again, maybe it's a little bit of a pipe dream. I wouldn't mind seeing, Pacioretty. Imagine him being out there on the Panarin line, some of the passes that he would be getting from Artemi Panarin and just winding back and letting it fly. That's, could be a match made in heaven for Panarin playing out there with Pacioretty. Something else to note, I think he gives you some leadership. He really kind of climbed the ladder in Montreal, started there. He was drafted by the Canadiens. He ends up becoming an alternate captain. And then a year later, he ends up being named the captain of the team as voted on by the players. The players wanted him to be the next captain. He also won the Bill Masterson Trophy for perseverance, sportsmanship, and dedication to hockey. That was after he returned very early in his career from a fracture of the 4th cervical vertebrae. and a severe concussion thanks to what I believe was a dirty hit by Zdeno Chara. He was retaliating from something that happened earlier in that season. We don't have to go through every step of that, but it was a retaliatory hit from Chara. Pacioretty obviously paid the price for it and suffered a really serious injury, and obviously he's gone on to have a great career nevertheless. One other thing that I just want to throw out there, is the fact that Drury and Pacioretty are both from Connecticut. I'm not sure if they know each other, if there's any history there, but want to at least throw that out there for at least a second as we wrap up our discussion on Max Pacioretty. But again, I think for Pacioretty and whichever team signs him, once again, that 1-year prove-it deal really does make a lot of sense for both parties. And again, I really like him for his ability to snipe and the fact that he can obviously play right wing. That's his primary position. And Pacioretty, one of those players that I think when it's all said and done next year, he's got to stay healthy. But whichever team picks him up, that might be one of the better signings of this offseason. And it all comes down to his health, because we know this guy is a great player, has been for a long time, and can obviously snipe. Again, with the Rangers, yes, I do think Max Pacioretty will be available at a discounted price and a discounted, total length of contract. I still don't think it's going to come down to the area where the Rangers can afford him, but it's one of those things where if he kind of just falls into their lap, if he lingers out there in free agency, if other teams are scared away, if his options are limited, then I think the Rangers need to at least monitor him. I think, in a perfect world, if the Rangers had a ton of cap space, he'd be a great fit, but I realize they don't, and it is a little bit of a long shot. But we got to throw out a couple of, off-the-wall ideas here on Locked On New York Rangers when we're looking at the different UFAs from around the league. And, Max Pacioretty, again, I don't see it happening, but enough of a little bit of a sliver of a chance that I thought it was at least worth talking about here. And we're going to keep everything rolling in just a second. There's one more player I want to talk about today. It's a veteran player, former Stanley Cup champion, and somebody that's known as an agitator, and has been a part of a lot of deep playoff runs for a lot of different teams. We're going to talk about him in just a second. All right, so to go ahead and keep everything rolling here, we're going to move our attention to Corey Perry, 38-year-old right winger for the Tampa Bay Lightning from this past season. There's obvious risk here. This is clearly not the Corey Perry that we got, 10 years ago, even 15 years ago, however far back you want to go. He is quite a bit older now. But with that said, for whatever team signs Corey Perry, as long as you keep your expectations in check and you understand the fact that at 38 years old, he's not going to be the same player that he was at 28 years old, then I think, you'll get somebody that is still a useful player in this league, somebody that can step in there on the fourth line, still play an effective role, somebody who plays hard, plays with an edge, someone who can really, really get under the skin of the opponent, someone who will set up shop in the crease. He doesn't mind getting in front of the goalie, getting in the goalie's face a little bit, trying to clean up some of those dirty goals. If you're looking for somebody of that ilk, I think Corey Perry could be your guy. And I think he could also be your guy based on his contract and what he would cost. And that is to say, not a whole lot, because on top of everything I just said, what he can still bring to the table, he probably won't cost much of anything. He's coming off a 2-year deal with the Tampa Bay Lightning. They paid him just $1 million per season. The year before the 2-year deal with Tampa, he was in Montreal, and he was making the league minimum on a 1-year deal of just $750,000. The league minimum is now $775K, and I think it's entirely possible that the Rangers could be able to get Corey Perry at his advanced age, for maybe not quite the league minimum, but if he is offered a $1 million deal, or maybe just north of $1 million per season from the Rangers, that could get it done for the Rangers and Corey Perry. To look at his full resume, there's a lot there. Obviously, he's been in this league for a long time. 1,257 games, 417 goals, 466 assists, so 883 points, a plus 51, 439 block shots, 1,122 hits. And his career in the playoffs, and this is something that I like as well, because he has been a playoff performer for his career, 196 career Stanley Cup playoff games for Corey Perry, 53 goals, 71 assists. So 124 points in 196 career playoff games. And you might hear that and think, well, that probably all happened at the start of his career. Yeah, the first half of his career, there's certainly more playoff points than there has been in recent seasons. But this past playoff run for Corey Perry, he ended up with 2 goals and 3 assists in the 6 games that Tampa Bay played in the first round here. So it's not like his production completely fell off a cliff or anything like that. And to kind of just highlight what he did this past season as a whole, 81 games with the Tampa Bay Lightning, so still a durable player, even at his kind of advanced age at this point. 12 goals, 13 assists, 25 points. He was a minus 28, which was the worst of his career. 11:34 of ice time per night, 48 hits, and 25 block shots. So again, if you keep your expectations in check and you understand the fact this is Corey Perry now and not Corey Perry 10 years ago, then I think you can still be pretty pleased with what he's going to give you on a pretty consistent basis. The other thing I want to point out here, Corey Perry's teams, they just win. I mean, first of all, you start with the Stanley Cup. He wins that with the Anaheim Ducks all the way back in 2007. And recently in his career, he actually made the Stanley Cup Finals 3 straight years with 3 different teams. Now, his teams did lose all 3 of those series. But regardless, obviously they made some deep playoff runs. Spent 1 year with the Stars. They made it to the finals and lost. He spent 1 year with the Canadiens. They made it to the finals and lost. And then he spent 2 years with the Lightning. And the first of those 2 years, they made it to the finals and lost. And then, of course, Tampa lost in the first round this year. But again, Corey Perry with the 5 points in the 6 games. So Corey Perry, looking like he can still be an effective player in this league, can still give you some bottom 6 scoring production. And obviously, he's somebody that's always going to be an agitator, always going to look to stir the pot, get under people's skin, and just do what he can do to drive you crazy. He's one of those players, when your team is going up against him, you can't stand him, but when he's on your team, it's actually a lot of fun. And I get the feeling, if Corey Perry was to join the Rangers and he does what he typically does throughout the course of a season, he'd probably end up being a pretty popular New York Ranger, certainly with the fans. And again, this goes back to something that we keep talking about here. The Rangers are very thin at right wing. Corey Perry away to kind of round out the lineup. And if the Rangers were to sign him, again, I think he'd come pretty cheap. And I think you could plug him in to that third line right wing spot. But I figure we could pretty much call it there for today. There's a lot of other UFAs around this league that we're going to take a look at sooner or later here, possibly in our next episode, or maybe in our next episode, we'll be talking about the next New York Ranger head coach. We shall see. But that will do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. And definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, at @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's at @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.